We are in Tanzania for the African Heads of State Energy Summit, hosted by the World Bank and the African Development Bank. We have different stakeholders, including governments, the private sector, civil society, and different development finance institutions, all here to push through Mission 300. Now, Mission 300 refers to electrifying the continent, particularly over 300 million people by 2030. And joining me now as we discuss this in greater detail is the Minister of Electricity, Kgosientso Ramokgopa. Minister, thanks so much for your time today. Now, as we get started, walk me through South Africa's role in particular when it comes to electrifying the continent.
Well, thank you very much, Ntauling. I think this is a very ambitious and welcomed initiative. I mean, coming to think that we still have about 683 million people who are experiencing unserved electricity, and 83% of those on the continent, in absolute number terms, about 600 million. It's a major travesty when we have seen significant technological development, the kind of advances that humanity has made, but you still have parts of the world where people don't have access to electricity. And also the fact that 500 million women on the continent are experiencing premature death as a result of cooking methods that are not safe. And they then realize, or the effects rather, creep in much later and premature death. So I think this is a major travesty. So we welcome the initiative by African leaders to ensure that we are able to accelerate this agenda of electrification. And of course, as we make the point, we want to halve this by 2030. It's an ambitious program. And of course, it also talks to the question of financing. How are you going to manage this mammoth program? But this has got some degree of similarities. Of course, the scale is much bigger with what we went through as a country. Advent of democracy, the level of penetration, 36%, and then President Mandela took a view that we want to achieve universal access. So one of the manifestations of inequality as it presented in our country was that of energy poverty, energy inequality, and hence the President's commitment to say that we want to achieve universal access. Of course, the timelines were not set, but that was a politically articulated agenda. And of course, we now know that it's got socio-economic manifestation because you lift people out of, or give them energy access, you make it possible to industrialize, for people to get educated, for people to get new skills, and then you realize upward mobility. So first, what is that lesson from South Africa? Or the South African template is that it has to be led from the front. So the political leadership must be at the forefront. And that's why you now have about 30 heads of states will be coming here tomorrow to articulate and confirm that agenda. The second one is that it is important that we are able to introduce a set of legislations, regulations that is going to support that. So in our own instance, first we gave it to Eskom and we codified it in the social, in the compact that we shareholder compact that we signed with Eskom. They need to electrify and also supported. The third element was to provide a financial support for that to happen. So we leverage the fiscus to support that. Of course, we had a healthy balance sheet in relative terms to other African countries. Of course, the major shortcoming here is that a lot of African countries don't have the healthy balance sheet, they don't have the liquidity, they don't have the financial mass. And I'm saying this with the greatest of respect. I mean, all of these things are documented. And that's why this conversation is important, to see how best we can syndicate various financing platforms. So your DFIs, African Development Bank is here, the World Bank is here, and also philanthropists to say this is a good cause, we want to support it. So essentially you create a basket of funding and you are able to exploit that funding and financing to accelerate the rollout. And that's the point I'm making, is that there are lessons that we have shared with delegates here. And I see, of course, you need to ensure that it means some of the most topical issues. I mean, the issues of debt that is facing the continent, the debt trap, the issues around the restructuring as a result of the difficulties that many of these countries have the IMF presence. So you need to resolve all of those issues. But I think it's important that you find a track on how best to aggregate and syndicate this financing so that you are able to advance. So our experience, although an outlier in the African context, I think it's also instructive. And there are other ministers who share their own experiences. And when you combine those, synthesize those experiences to ensure that they meet some of the challenges that are confronting us today, and we are able to design an instrument that can help us to achieve this 300 million people being electrified. I think it's going to be major, if you like, forward momentum for the continent. I mean, we are really leapfrogging. And you can see some of the solutions that are here. You don't necessarily rely on expensive backbone infrastructure. Remember how we connected ourselves, build transmission line, distribution line, reticulation, and all of that. When now technology is advanced, you can make the behind the meter interventions, microgrids, you can hybrid and all of that. So technology now is making it both faster, relatively inexpensive, and of course it's also scalable, but we are also drawing on our own renewable energy endowment. So South Africa has got the potential to provide 40% of the total renewable energy capacity of the globe, because 60% of the renewable assets, your most efficient assets are on the continent. So if you like, we've got these endowments which we are not using productively, a function of absence of technology and financing. So I think we'll be answering those questions in this conference.
Talk to me about that a bit in detail, Minister. You know, yesterday I was on a press trip and we went to one of the distribution centers in Dodoma, right? And they were explaining to us how they are sharing power lines within East Africa. So, you know, power being distributed from Dodoma into, let's say, Kenya, Rwanda, and even going as far as Ethiopia. And they are building a line into Southern Africa that goes into Zambia, right? What are some of the efforts? You know, you mentioned the renewable assets that South Africa can bring to the table as well. What are some of the initiatives, some of the partnerships to get that, you know, that power line that expands throughout the continent, so we are supporting each other?
Oh, excellent. So one of the things that we set ourselves as a priority in the energy sector during our presidency of the G20 is what we call regional connectivity, with a special focus on Africa and the energy pools. So if you were to look on the map of Africa, it has been partitioned into four. So there's a Southern African power pool, which is anchored by South Africa. So we're connected to Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Mozambique, Angola, Zambia. So if you like, we are able to ensure that we were able to exploit the endowments in these countries, and then you are able to share it amongst yourself. Of course, the downside of the Southern African power pool is that South Africa was a dominant player. So in theory, we shouldn't have had the bout of load shedding that we had, because if others were producing in excess, then we'll be able to draw import. But South Africa has been a net exporter over a period of time, and I guess that is the advantage that we've built over time. So the North is doing that, and in fact, the North is also going into Europe. So I'm talking of you are Egypt, Morocco, and Algeria, fairly well connected, and then you have the East and the West. So the point we're making is that if there's that regional interconnectivity and creating a single electricity market across the continent, so in theory you can draw on the resources from anywhere on the continent, because the megawatts are moving. Of course, you must account for that. I'm just saying in theory. Of course, it gets complex when you do the technical designs themselves. But you must invest in your transmission capacity. One of the limiting factors, like my Zambian counterpart, because of the drought situation, and you know that hydro is our biggest generator. So when they had drought, so it means that about 80% of their generation capacity was, or 50% of their generation capacity was wiped off. So I think they are experiencing the levels of load shedding more intense than the ones we have experienced. But we have situations in the country that we are generating excess capacity, but the capacity of the transmission line is not sufficient for us to give them more than 400 megawatts that we're giving. Otherwise, we could be giving them more. As is the situation that there's excess generation. So you still need to improve that capacity of the transmission line, but also modernize it. By modernizing, I mean, remember that we are moving, there's going to be a big share of renewable energy. They are non-dispatchable, they are intermittent. Essentially, they come as and when they want to. So when the sun is up, when the wind is blowing. So you must account for those oscillations when they come into the grid. There might be a surge coming, generating significantly more megawatts. So you must be able to regulate it to be able to protect the grid. Or it might be absent, then you are relying on other sources. So modernization really is around that, to ensure that you are able to exploit the capability of your asset in a manner that it meets the demand profile of the continent. So those are the conversations that are happening. But truth be told, I mean, as we have those conversations, they are capital intensive, you can imagine. There are solutions that are, if you like, the least cost of electrification. The issues of solar and that, of course, they just do the bare minimum. But we accept that we are moving in stages. I think that's the point that we are making going forward. So we're having those conversations, but beyond conversations, it's about what are those set of action. I mean, when we go home, we have announced there back home, we're introducing what I call electricity for all. As I speak to you now, there's a lot of South Africans who can't relate to the message I'm making. Say, but you are in Tanzania talking about connecting people, the contributions, the lessons they can learn from us, but we are experiencing load reduction. You still have a 6 percentage points of households that don't have access to electricity. So we have not, in the true sense, achieved universal access, far advanced compared to our peer countries. I mean, when we transitioned from apartheid to democracy, 36% penetration, we are now at 96, 92, 94%. I'm saying that because depending on who you read, the figure is, but all I know is above 90%. So we are doing those computations to get the actual number, but simultaneously we are rolling out so that people can relate to this message, that when we talk in the country, we're talking electricity for all, that we are able to truly achieve universal penetration. And I'm confident we'll achieve it during this term of the 7th administration.
All right, so you touched on something important there, the issue around load reduction. And you know, we've had over 300 days without load shedding. But isn't it an issue of semantics here, what load shedding is and load reduction?
No, from an end user point of view, it's the same. There are periods in the day where I'm not having access to electricity. So it's the same. But from a technical point of view, it's completely different because it helps you to resolve the problem. What is the problem we're resolving? It was aggregate generation and aggregate demand to support that. But now we know in the value chain that there are points of failure downstream. When I reticulate to your house, to my house, over capacity, or right, under capacity. By under capacity, I mean drawing from the distribution infrastructure more than the capacity of that infrastructure, because municipality or ESCOM has not been able to build in opportunities for growth, or they've built that opportunity for growth, that projections for growth, over designed that distribution infrastructure. But you find that the rate of growth is unmanaged, and by unmanaged I mean there's been illegal connection. So the growth has not followed a linear, if you like, growth path or a predictable growth path, but it just happened haphazardly because other people just decided we are going to connect on our own. So yes, so you have to understand, what am I solving? So we know that we are solving a downstream problem. We know that we are solving a capacity from a reticulation and distribution point of view. And now when I talk electricity for all on load reduction, we know what the interventions are. So they are different from, I'm not going to generate new capacity. It's not my biggest problem. It's how I reticulate that which is generated through this distribution infrastructure to be sufficient to meet the demand that is localized. Then I must invest in that distribution asset expanding. Then I must ensure everyone that consumes or draws from this asset is properly accounted for. So we're able to meter them, we're able to do what the consumption is, and we're able to collect, and those that qualify for indigent they get to be front-loaded every beginning of the month to get their share of free basic electricity. That's what we are solving. But from an end consumer point of view, he experienced that during load shedding, experiencing that during load reduction, is the same. But from an engineering and a planning point of view, it's not the same, completely different. But yes, I mean, I sympathize with the end consumer. We don't have to burden them with this explanation. Let's just solve the problem.
And what I'm hearing here is that it seems like the simplification, the unbundling of ESCOM will make this process
Absolutely, yes,
easier.
yes, absolutely.
But we are dealing with that, that burden, that debt burden, of course, that's over 100 billion rands from...
And growing.
Yes, it's growing from
Yes,
municipalities,
yes,
right?
yes.
And ESCOM's chair, Mthethwa Nyathi, also highlighting that issue and how it is stopping them from unbundling the distribution and the generation units. We do have the transmission unit running. How are we mitigating those risks so that we can successfully unbundle ESCOM?
So my view is that how you engage with the problem, you can lament and throw your hands in the air and say we can't resolve it. Or you see it to introduce innovative intervention, and in fact it becomes an opportunity for something new. So first we need to protect those revenue streams. So like I say, I make the point that municipal debt to ESCOM over 100 billion rand and growing. So what we know is that if you don't make any intervention, it's going to continue to grow. So that's a given. Huh? Okay, so how best do I stem that? First, you want to ensure that you protect at least your current account, that municipalities are able to pay that current account before we can even look at how the debt has grown over a period of time. So ensure that there's completeness of billing. Everyone that consumes must be billed. And I made the point earlier on about illegal connection. If you go to many of these communities, they will tell you, I've been on the ground and having been the mayor. No, we want to pay. Don't have a problem. Roll out your meters. We'll roll out the meters and also redesign the distribution infrastructure to have sufficient capacity to meet that demand. Then meter the people. And then you are able to protect your revenue stream because it's prepaid. So I'm accounting for everyone and everyone pays. So I've locked in my capacity to protect my revenue going forward. Then we can have a different conversation around what do we do about this 100 billion rand that is being owed. So you can incentivize and say that if you become a diligent payer over time, I gradually bring it down. Because a lot of it, and it's very uncomfortable. And I make the point to ESCOM and my colleagues there for good reason. They say, but what does it say to bondholders? But this is the truth. A significant proportion of that is irrecoverable. Let me give you an example of a municipality called Machabi. Owes ESCOM over 5 billion rand. They, under no circumstances will they be able to pay. Let's go to Mfuleni, over 7 billion rand. They will not be able to pay. So what's the point I'm saying is that they protect the revenue streams going forward. And let's find a mechanism on how best to deal with historic debt. If it means write it off, then you can write it off. But it has to be part of a totality of a package, a suite of intervention to incentivize diligent paying going into the future. Of course, the people who are penalized is the diligent payer. You have been paying, I've not been paying, and suddenly they write it off. But I've been consuming in the same way that they've been consuming. You are the primary casualty of that. Then let's find ways of how we're going to resolve this going forward. So is this point going forward, how do we protect those revenue streams? Separate that conversation from what is being owed. And then once down the line, then we reconcile them. What do we do about that debt? But what you know is that the situation will not deteriorate going forward. If anything, it becomes healthier. You are collecting more and more. You are able to reinvest into these assets to protect them and modernize them.
But then what does that mean for ESCOM as an investment case, Minister? I'm thinking of how you just mentioned, the bondholders that could possibly suffer if the debt is not recoverable, right? And we've also had talk around listing SOEs. What does that mean for someone that's looking to put in money into ESCOM?
Well, I think the guarantee you want is that going forward, first, the debt will not balloon, but you are also able to ring fence your revenue streams. So I'm saying we're drawing the line in the sand, saying going forward we are protecting these revenue streams, and in fact we are enhancing them. Protecting because those who are already consuming, we make sure that they pay. We are enhancing it because those who have been consuming and not paying, we also make sure that they pay. So we are able to increase that basket. And once we are able to secure that revenue stream, we can have a different conversation around what are we doing about the debt. But to think that you are going to collect it, unfortunately, I mean, I must tell the truth. Just shared with you two particular examples of municipalities that will not have the muscle to be able to pay for that. But what we know is that in many of these instances, is that consumers are paying, but that money is not reaching ESCOM because these municipalities have got other pressure points. So they redeploy the money there. But if you've got a platform, smart meters, prepaid, the money comes to ESCOM, they collect their money and they are able to reinvest going forward. Very difficult conversation, I do understand. But those are honest, candid, a frank discussion around what is the nature of the problem we're trying to solve and what are the instruments that are available at our disposal to make sure that we don't have a repeat going forward. And if anything, you have an improved picture going forward. That's the point I'm making.
It's interesting to see how everything is playing out within local municipalities, Minister, because we have a similar issue playing out within the water industry
Yes,
as well.
yes,
So
yes,
it's
yes.
very interesting to see. But I'd like to go back to the issue around load shedding. We've had quite a few consultancy firms, experts make statements around load shedding potentially coming back, particularly around the energy availability factor that they say is deteriorating. Is there any truth into those statements?
Well, first is that a point was made when we we experienced the first run of no load shedding leading to the elections. So we're accused that this is an election gimmick. In fact, on the night of the election, one of the leaders of the opposition party says once the voting count is done, then load shedding will come back. And I keep on reinforcing the message that I've been making to the general public to say we've been transparent about the management of this crisis. We've been direct about communicating some of the progress that we have made, the lack of progress that we have made in relation to executing the strategy or the plan, the energy action plan. And I did say that investing in your generating assets, the fiscal support that we receive from National Treasury, and its optimal, if you like, allocation to various power stations. So we identified 6 power stations that were accounting for 75% of the losses and focused on those. And I did say that it's short-term pain, long-term gain. As the load shedding was intensifying because we had to take out these units even in the midst of load shedding to fix them, I made the point. And then we're beginning to see the kind of progress that we're seeing. So I really am not I'm not shaken by what others are saying. It's about executing against our plan. But it's true that after we have made these strides and generated significant headroom for us to be able to absorb any kind of failure, we did experience some units failing at the rate that is not desirable. But because we have built enough headroom, we're able to absorb those failures, and then you have not seen load shedding. And again, you can see the system is recovering going forward, and that is seen in the numbers also. Save 16 billion rand over the same period, comparable period last year, on OCGTs, burning less and less diesel over that period of time. So I'm confident about our ability to recover. The fact that Unit 2 at Quebec is back. Of course, it must still go through the licensing. It's giving us the megawatts. You remember his extension of life. Unit number 4 at Medupi will come on stream. Unit number 6 at Kusile will be synchronized. Once it's synchronized to the grid, then Kusile ceases to be a construction site. Of course, there are issues of warranties that still needs to be managed going forward. But the point I'm making is that we are seeing this kind of progress that we referred to, and it's giving us the fruits. And of course, I mean, there will be comments by various commentators who will say one or two things just to express a view. We really are not bothered. In the same manner that we're not bothered by what the outside world were saying. We're concerned about the consumer and business and the industry because they were really suffering. There were people coming out of the woodwork calling themselves energy experts. I'm not about to question their bona fides, but we are transfixed on the resolution of the problem and allow commentators to be commentators. We will execute. We are in the field of play.
Before I let you go, Minister, you were at the G20 summit with the president and the rest of Team SA last week. And just take us through the messaging, all right, or rather the sentiment on the continent, on South Africa as well, as we prepare to host the G20 summit. And, you know, just a curveball, I read that you were also in the meeting with the ArcelorMittal's chief board executive, right, to just chat about AMSA closing down the mills in South Africa. Talk to me also about the sentiment around that and how receptive the board executive was.
Oh yes, we were at Davos, and yes, we met the founder, Lakshmi Mittal, myself, Minister Tahu, and Minister Godongwana. Of course, Minister Tahu is Minister of DTIC. He's the focal point, the one that is drawing. We made our proposal. I'll leave that to Minister Tahu because I'm just a small cog in a bigger picture. Minister Tahu will provide a comprehensive articulation of what constitutes our response. Of course, engagement, cabinet, president, and then he'll come out. So I really don't want to run ahead of myself. I'll leave Minister Tahu to do that. On the overall sentiment, so first, the message we are bringing with President Ramaphosa as the head of delegation to Davos makes the following point. This is really Africa's G20. South Africa is the only sovereign country on the continent that is a full member of the G20. As a result, the continent has got an opportunity to host the G20, the first on the African continent. So we see this as a platform to surface issues that are of a geographic nature, the geography in this instance, that they affect Africa in the main. And that's why we talk about solidarity, we talk about equality, we talk about sustainability. You can use any lens, the energy lens, the health lens, access to healthcare, food security. There are various manifestations of the dimensions of this each sector in relation to solidarity, in relation to equality, and also in relation to sustainability. From our perspective, we think there are three priorities. The first one is to achieve energy security, affordable and reliable access. The 600 million people I spoke about who don't have access to electricity. So we're lifting that conversation. And what is the role of the developed world? And you can see here we're beginning to ensure that we canvass and agitate, including philanthropy, to participate in the financing of that agenda, hence Mission 300. The second one is around just and affordable energy transitions. So the point we're making is that the transitions are not the same. They take into account the domestic nuances, the need for us to be able to use our natural endowments, the ability to finance that transition. What can we afford as an aggregate of the mix? So that's why we're talking transitions. And I think the continent will articulate what those transitions are. And then the last element is regional connectivity with focus on Africa and the energy pools. The point I made earlier on, the Southern African power pool, SADC seen as a single electricity market or part of the single electricity market on the continent, and how best we can use the endowments as a profile present itself. I mean, you go to the DRC, the Great Inga, you can get 42,000 megawatts of generation capacity from hydro. You go to South Africa, the Namibia, and the Northern Cape, the opportunities around green hydrogen because of the quality of the sun that you are getting in those parts. You go to Mozambique, you go to Angola. There are endowments with regards to gas and oil. So these are our opportunities. They present themselves different as we move from one part of the African geography to the other. But if we see them as part of the whole, we'll be able to exploit our endowments to the benefit of the continent and her people.
Minister, thank you so much for your time and just sharing your insights on the back of the African Heads of State Summit. Thank you. That was the Minister of Electricity in South Africa, Kgosientso Ramokgopa.